known a lot of private investigators, but I've never known one like that. Most of them are quiet, responsible businessmen, I'm happy to report, but there is a small, unscrupulous minority among the private eyes of this country who should be put out of business. Tonight you'll learn why.
Confidential File. A report by Paul Coates, one of the nation's distinguished news reporters, brings you a factual report on America today, its people and their lives.
I think that of all the trades and professions, the private investigator is undoubtedly the least understood by the general public. This fact, of course, can be attributed to the artistic imaginations of our authors and screenwriters. I can assure you that private detectives really exist, several thousand of them, in fact, in this country. If you stay on the straight and narrow, the chances are you'll never meet one. But then, not all of us stay on the straight and narrow, do we? It's like old Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, trouble with this world is everybody's just in too much of a hurry, and a lot of us are hurrying right into trouble. That's what this story is about, trouble. It's not a news story to you. You see it in the headlines every day. But one of the frustrating things about the headlines is that they seldom tell the real story in terms of human experience. The lady's in a hurry. That's because she has something to hide. And she's going about it in the routine manner. She's trying to create false evidence to prove she's been working her little fingers to the bone over a hot stove all day long. Sometimes the culprit tries to get people to lie for him. This lady's trying to get a pot full of potatoes to commit perjury in her behalf. There's no clock watcher like the guilty clock watcher. How's that for timing? A little too close? That's what she's thinking. You see, this is not a happy home we've dropped into. A man doesn't move quietly into his home if it's a happy one. He doesn't give the mail a quick once-over before he says hello to his wife. We join this couple at a stage of armed truce. He's suspicious and she knows it. But neither one has admitted for an instant that anything at all is wrong. Everything is quite pleasant if you call life on a powder keg pleasant. She asks him if he had a nice day at the office. He says yes, he did. Did she have a nice day at home? But incidentally, aren't those kind of formal earrings to be wearing around the house? Formal? Well, just because she likes to look nice for him when he comes home, if he's going to get suspicious and start grilling her, well, maybe she ought to stop wearing lipstick and leave her hair in curlers. After all, darling, she did it just for you. Take it easy, pal. Everything's going to be okay. Potatoes may be a little lumpy, but everything's going to be fine. The devil it is. He's mad. He thinks his wife's a double-crossing little so-and-so, and he wants pictures to prove it. Now, today, get on it immediately. Put a tail on her. He doesn't care what methods he used as long as he gets the evidence. And the evidence has to be strong. If this woman gets into court, she'll take him for every nickel he's got. He wants the kind of evidence that will make her sign a property agreement without even reading it. The detective understands immediately what he's driving at, and he'll make a deal. Of course, it'll cost a lot of money. An eye can get his fingers burned on a case like this. Bright and early the next morning, phase 2 of our little drama begins. 5 minutes after the Lord and Master leaves for the office, Milady also quits the premises. Where to? Well, who can say, but we'll know soon enough. You see, Milady is not alone. And according to the theory, at least, she won't be alone until her husband has his evidence on 8x10 glossies. This is the time I'd like to speak especially to those young men and women who dream of making their living as private detectives. Confidentially, it can be pretty dull work. You'll find the clients are wrong a good percentage of the time, and believe me, nothing can be duller than following an idle, rich matron around while she kills time. Looks like this rich, idle matron has time on her mind, too. But suddenly things start happening faster. Her timing's a little close, but she certainly knows the best way to make a meet. Any cop will agree this is the perfect method of shaking it down. And any private eye will tell you it's a dirty trick to play on a guy who's not in top condition. Next time you're in a nice cocktail lounge, take a look around. I get a kick out of looking at the couples and trying to guess what their story is. Take these two, for instance. Somehow they just don't quite look like husband and wife. And he certainly doesn't look like a detective. But here they all are, mixed in with people like you and me. Maybe he's the first, maybe he's the 50th. It all comes to the same thing. This woman's trying to get more out of life than the rules allow. And I give you my word for one thing, not many people get away with it. Right now, while one half of her is having the time of its life, the other half is wondering if she really doesn't look just a little bit silly. The detective, what's he thinking? He's wondering what his wife's fixing for dinner tonight. Actually, they've provided more than enough evidence right in that booth for a divorce under the laws of most states. But the client said find out everything. While our principals are so pleasantly occupied, I'd like to point out a couple of things about this particular operation. Why the fees are so high, for instance. If this detective's assignment was simply to go out and get enough evidence to secure a divorce for the husband, his job would be wrapped up right now. All he'd have to do is snap a couple of pictures of this charming little scene, and in most states, a divorce would be a cinch. But our detective friend's mission is more fiduciary than domestic. The husband wants a divorce, it's true. But he wants it the easy way, with no back talk. He wants to be in the position of saying to his once beloved spouse, sign this property settlement or else. To get this kind of evidence, the detectives may have to bend a few ethics, and everybody knows that ethics cost money. There's another thing you might be interested in knowing about private detectives. Once in a while, one of them will get a little pushy. If you haven't done anything wrong, you don't have to take it. Private detectives have exactly the same police powers that you and I have. As far as any special authority is concerned, they're just plain people. And so the threesome that thinks it's a twosome moves on into the trap they've set for themselves. The first thing is to call for the husband and some help. From here on in, it's no longer a one-man job, and I want to say one more thing about the next few scenes. I'm not defending adultery, I think it's wrong. But there's also a right way and a wrong way to go about proving adultery. And what you're about to see is, in my opinion, the wrong way. It's unnecessary and it may be against the law. That's a camera. In a crowd, you can make it look like a cigarette lighter. You'll need the heavy artillery for the next job. And here comes the rest of the team. An irate husband and a brawny private eye. This is to make sure the only shooting to be done is with a camera. The end of the hunt. This is where they collect those 8x10 glossies. Notice the detective kicked the door in. If there's any trouble, he'll say the husband did it. This is the bust-in, the thing that ought to be stopped. It's effective, of course, in making a property settlement your way, but I think it's wrong. Later on, I'll tell you why. The private detectives in this film were investigators for the firm of Hartman and Myers, a highly reputable organization, a firm, incidentally, which refuses bust-in assignments. I suspect that many of you may be rather angry at me right now, that you may feel the film you just saw was a statement of defense for adultery. Not true. I think the people who commit adultery must expect to face the consequences of their actions. But trite as this may sound, two wrongs don't make a right. The bust-in you just saw was unnecessary, completely unnecessary, and there's a serious question as to its legality. Adequate evidence could have been obtained without subjecting the husband to the profound emotional disturbance of seeing his wife in that situation, if a divorce was all he wanted. Actually, there's another factor involved, as there is in many cases of this type. That factor is money, cold, hard cash. The guilty spouse will almost invariably sign any kind of property settlement in order to buy back the kind of pictures you just saw taken. Does all this sound a little bit like blackmail to you? That's what it sounds like to me. Confidential File will be back in a moment. First, here's a message from our sponsor. Can I have your name, please?
Mildred Gilmore.
And your age?
50.
Your occupation?
I'm an attorney and a private detective.
You also hold a position in a detective organization. Would you tell us about that?
I hold a position in quite a few detective organizations. I'm a director for the World Secret Service Association, and I belong to the New York, Illinois, and California Association, overseas director for the British Association.
How long have you been a detective, Miss Gilmore?
Ever since I was 18, about 30 years.
You're also an attorney?
Yes, and I've been a police officer and a probation officer.
Is law practice just a sideline for you?
No, it is not. Both of them work very well together.
How long has there been an international private detective agency?
Oh, at least 50 years.
And what was the purpose in forming one?
To raise the standards of the profession, to legislate for better laws and for the protection of the public, and to make a method of exchanging work at distant places.
How would that work?
Well, for instance, recently we had a case where a lady was going to Europe, and it was really a good deal of interest to know what she did when she got to France. So I placed a telephone call. She was put under surveillance, and inside of a very few hours, when she went to the Riviera, she found a handsome young Frenchman.
What kind of practices is the World Secret Service Association interested in eliminating?
Anything that's unethical, frame-ups, crashes, persons that are not qualified to do the work or do it improperly.
What kind of qualifications do you think should be required of private investigators?
Good educational background, integrity, ability, actual experience.
How much money would an average investigator make?
Well, it would depend upon where the work was done. It would vary from $10 to $50 a day according to the location and also the type of case they were assigned to.
10 to 50 a day?
Yes.
Then those $100 bills we see floating around on movie screens in private eye stories, just a lot of Hollywood glamour, huh?
Well, once in a while you might see one, but very, very seldom, and actually the glamour, too, is greatly exaggerated.
How do you mean it is?
Well, I remember one case that another inventor and I worked for 32 hours in a rainstorm in a car, and the total amount of our report amounted to the lady left the house at 6:30 a.m., placed garbage pail on curb, and re-entered the house.
What kind of special equipment does the modern private detective use?
Well, everything that comes along that's new, tape, wire, taps, fluorescent powder, sound equipment. There's some now that works by remote control, and of course the small sound equipment that you can wire yourself with and take a conversation down like you and I sitting here. You wouldn't see it on me.
What do you think of the bust-in, Miss Gilmore? I appreciate that you have said that the association is opposed to it. What do you personally think of it?
I think it's very bad, and as a lawyer as well as a detective, I certainly don't approve of it. It isn't necessary. Adultery is the main reason usually for a crash. The proof of divorce can be obtained without that, and it violates the rights of the individual. Burglary, trespass, many things can take place.
Then as an attorney, you don't feel the bust-in is legal?
It isn't legal in most cases, and as a general rule, the harm comes from your own client who gets out of hand. The reputable agency certainly wouldn't do a thing like that.
Well, Miss Gilmore, thank you very much for your cooperation this evening.
You're welcome.
Thank you. But on the other side of the slate, we find a type of private detective to whom the word honesty is a gag line. He's out for a buck, and he doesn't care how he gets it. Can I have your first name, please?
Julia.
And your age?
I'm 49.
And your occupation?
I'm a nurse.
Julia, what do you know about private detectives?
I've had only one experience, but it was very horrifying, very terrifying.
Would you tell us about it, please?
Well, it really didn't have anything to do with me. It was about a man whom I worked for a good many years that was having matrimonial difficulties.
How did you get involved, Julia?
Well, we were good friends, and he lives in a club, and I know that he gets very tired eating at the club, so I asked him over to my home for dinner.
Were there just the two of you there?
No, my 16-year-old daughter was there.
What
She
happened?
likes this man very much. We're good friends.
What happened then, Julia?
After dinner, we watched television, and about 11:15, my daughter and I decided to go to bed. Our friend was watching television, so we asked him if he'd like to spend the night there, that we had a guest room, and he was perfectly welcome to stay if he cared to.
And he accepted your invitation?
Yes, he said he thought it was a very good idea. He dreaded the drive back into town.
And then what happened?
And said he would stay. My daughter and I showed him to the guest room, said good night, and went into our room and locked the door.
Do you and your daughter have the same room?
Yes, we shared the same room.
I see. And then you went to bed?
Yes, we went to bed.
What was the next thing that happened?
About 4:30 in the morning, I heard a loud noise on the stairway. The first thing that came to my mind was that my friend had gone upstairs to the bathroom and probably had become ill and had fallen down the steps.
It was a loud noise then?
Yes, it was quite loud. It was a thumping noise.
What did you do?
Well, I didn't have time to do anything. The next thing that happened, the door sprung open and there was bright lights flashed in my face. 3 men beside my bed. One was over on the left side pulling at my leg, and one of the men were trying to tear the sheets off of my daughter and I. One of the men was trying to get the girl out of bed, the child out of bed.
Did these men say anything?
No, nothing was said. The first thing that entered my mind was that they were trying to kidnap the girl, so I said, please don't bother her, don't harm her.
And what did they do?
Well, one of the men said, oh, that isn't your daughter. And about that time, I saw a woman enter the room.
Did you recognize
Yes,
this woman?
I recognized this woman as being the estranged wife of this
Of
friend
your
of
friend?
mine, yes, of my friend.
And what happened then, Julia?
The woman grabbed hold of the little girl and tried to pull her out of bed and kept pointing to me, saying, she's the one, she's the one. Our picture was taken, and the man hollered, okay, let's get out of here.
Did your guest come into the room during this tussle?
No, because when they broke in, they went directly to his room, jerked off the covers, took his picture, and he was still asleep. So he realized what was going on and stayed out of the room.
I see. Did they leave after that?
The 2 men and the woman left the room, but they left the man that had struck me in the face by the door. I jumped out of bed and tried to go up the stairway, but he kept holding me back, pushing me back, and kicking me on the legs with his shoes. Finally, he gave me one last shove, and as I started to fall backwards, I grabbed hold of his tie and pulled his face right down to mine, and of course his His breath was reeking with liquor. I'm sure he was drunk.
Well, what's resulted from the incident? Has the wife attempted to use these pictures?
No, there was no picture, nothing to take a picture of.
Have you tried to seek legal recourse for the break-in to your home?
Yes, I called the police immediately, and at 8:30 in the morning, the same morning, I talked to the prosecuting attorney.
And what did he tell you?
He told me that, listened to my story, and he told me that I could sign a complaint against the woman for disturbing the peace. But there was no law that said that you cannot break into someone's home and jerk the covers off of them and take a picture of them.
What about the detectives?
I still don't know their names, and I'd give a lot to find out.
Well, Julia, thank you very much for your cooperation tonight. In many of the shady professions, like the legitimate ones, highly refined techniques are employed, highly trained specialists required. I'd like you to meet one of the specialists in the divorce racket field. Can I have your first name, please?
Linda,
Your age?
23.
And your occupation?
And you could say I'm a model.
Linda, what do you know about the private detective business?
Well, I used to work with one down in Texas.
You had sort of an arrangement with him?
That's right.
What kind of an arrangement? What'd you do for him?
Well, I used to help him get evidence in divorce cases.
Get the evidence? Do you mean manufacture it?
Well, you could call it that.
How did you operate, Linda?
Well, he would point out the guy to me in the case, and then I would manage to get friendly with him.
You want to be a little more specific?
Well, I could tell you about one case. The lady in the case wanted to get alimony from her husband, so she hired the detective that I worked with.
And what happened?
The husband was going to Houston on a business trip. The detective and I followed on the next plane and checked into the same hotel.
How did you get to meet the man?
Well, that evening he was down in the bar in the hotel, and I managed it where he invited me over for a drink. We had a few drinks, and then we went back to the hotel.
And I suppose your room was on the same floor as his?
That's right. We went in and had a couple of drinks. Things went along as you might have expected them to, and then the photographer and the detective came in and snapped the pictures.
Then they left right away?
Well, the photographer left, but the detective, if he was any kind of a gentleman, well, he would wait until I was ready to leave.
So the detective waited for you and got you out of the room before you got into trouble?
That's right.
That's pretty standard procedure?
No, not always. Sometimes it wasn't that easy.
How do you mean? Give me an example.
Well, one time we had to use sleeping pills on a fella to get him the way we wanted him.
That's what you call roping, isn't it?
Well, you could use that term.
Is it used?
Yes, it's a standard term.
Then you might be known as a rope artist in the trade, huh?
You could call it that.
What are some other ways you've roped unwilling victims, Linda?
Well, there's several ways. Like there's one way, if we know the husband isn't the type to play around, well, we wait until he goes out of town on a business trip. Then it's always easy to arrange for adjoining rooms, connecting doors. After he goes to sleep, the girl usually gets in a negligee and goes through the connecting door. The photographer is usually right behind her and snaps the picture just as she sits down on the bed, and the husband wakes up. It's just the look of surprise is usually pretty effective.
And then you run right out of the room and he never knows what happened.
That's right.
What do you charge for jobs like this, Linda?
Well, that depends on how hard it is, the job. I mean, like, the usual is $250, but the sleeping pill is $500.
I should think that you'd have, by this time, had some pretty angry people to contend with after they found out they'd been roped. Have you ever had any trouble along that line?
No, and in fact, one of the fellows that I roped turned out to be a pretty steady boyfriend afterward.
Are you still doing this kind of thing?
No, I'm not doing it anymore.
I see. Well, anyway, thank you for cooperating with us tonight. I hope you never need a private detective, but if you do need one, be cautious about whom you hire. Tighter laws are needed to control the activities of shady private detectives, but in the meantime, there are other things you can do. If you plan to hire a private investigator, contact your attorney, your banker, or your chamber of commerce. Make the detective you select give you a contract, and make him give you complete written reports of all his activities in your behalf. According to many leading jurists I've spoken to, the bust-in is a violation of civil rights. Maybe you think that people who get involved in a situation calling for this kind of questionable practice deserve exactly what they get. But remember this, the loss of any civil right is a step toward the loss of every civil right. And now, here's a final message from the sponsor of Confidential File.
You have just witnessed another authentic report by Paul Coates, distinguished columnist and news reporter. These factual reports are brought to you each week by this station. The opinions expressed by Mr. Coates and the participants in this program do not necessarily reflect those of station or sponsor.